And now for some insights and analysis, maybe a little perspective, Gillian Turner, Fox News contributor, former White House National Security Advisor under the Bush and Obama administrations. Gillian, nice to see you.
You too, Leland. You look cold out there.
Yeah, well, it's a little chilly out here, brisk but nice. New York Times reporting this is how Trump's calls to world leaders are upsetting decades of diplomacy. Really? A couple of phone calls upsetting decades of diplomacy, or does decades of diplomacy need to be upset?
So my take on this is that there's nothing wrong with President-elect Trump shaking up foreign policy. As you know, we've kind of been on the retreat largely on the world stage over the last decade. Our influence in many regions around the world has been diminished. But that said, what I do fault him for here, and I think was a really disastrously bad move, was his call with the Taiwanese leader. And not because he accepted the call. I think that he should absolutely, as Ambassador Bolton said earlier this morning, speak to whatever foreign leaders he wants to. The problem for me is that he inadvertently acknowledged their national sovereignty, which is not something that's in the United States' national security interest. And he did that when he referred to them as a country and referred to their leader as a president. I think that was a bad move.
Well, now you say that you think this was a bad move because you think he didn't know what he was doing, or you think he knew what he was doing, but doing that in and of itself was a bad move? If so, why?
I give him a lot more credit than to say this was a gaffe. I think he knows exactly what he's doing at this point. I don't believe the critics who say that Mr. Trump is so ignorant at this point that he would sort of take calls willy-nilly. I think he knows exactly what he's doing, but I disagree with his decision is what I'm saying. And I think that the problem here...
Okay, so why?
Because the problem with acknowledging Taiwanese sovereignty at this stage is that it deeply angers China. And I don't care about China's feelings. What I care about are our national security interests. We need the Chinese to help hedge against North Korea's nuclear program, and we need the Chinese to not sell off the billions of dollars of U.S. debt that they currently hold, because that would precipitate a financial crisis here at home.
You know, we heard Donald Trump take aim at the Chinese, especially during the election. This was sort of one of his big punching bags about they were taking our jobs, they're being in negotiations, I am going to negotiate better deals. In a way, could this perhaps be sort of the opening salvo of trying to undermine a little bit of the Chinese, take away the comfort they have found, if you will, with the Obama administration that has given them state visits and not responded to their hacking and cyber attacks?
Absolutely. I think that's entirely 100% what President-elect Trump is trying to signal with this interaction. And he does have a little bit more leeway to do that now than he will have in 2 months when he actually becomes the commander-in-chief and he's setting policy. At this stage, I went back and forth a lot with people on Twitter this morning. Does he have more freedom as president-elect versus being president? I think he does, but he still has to take responsibility for the fact that other foreign nations are going to interpret his actions as U.S. foreign policy at this time. So there is a little bit of a line to toe.
You picked up on this point, though, of other nations. And not only are the nations that this is happening to taking note, be it the Chinese or the Pakistanis, as Brian Yennis was reporting, but the rest of the world is taking note. Whether you're at the president's residence in France, Francois Hollande, whether you're at the Ayatollah in Iran, you're realizing, to use the phrase, there's a new sheriff in town.
Yeah,
or at least will be.
Yeah, totally. And I think that actually something that hasn't been talked a lot about this week is that his nomination of General Mattis to be the Secretary of Defense sends a huge signal to the world, particularly to the foreign policy community. This is somebody who's steeped in U.S. foreign policy towards the Middle East, has publicly said that that's where our focus needs to be as a nation. And I think that part of his nomination is President Trump signaling, you know what, I know the Obama administration pivoted towards Asia, but we're going to pivot back to the Middle East because that's where the security threats are emanating from right now.
Well, something John Mattis has been incredibly outspoken about, just as John Bolton has on the short list for Secretary of State, is Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. General Mattis has said multiple times over the past couple of years that he believes Iran is the #1 sort of, aside from terrorism, the #1 national security threat the United States faces. He was very critical of the Iran nuclear deal, but interestingly, and I agree with him on this, he also doesn't think that we should renege on it at this point in time. As bad as and flawed as the deal was, we've got to live with it.
Well, what you just said, among other things, may be the subject of some discussion on Twitter when you get off. She's available anytime, at Gillian Turner. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Leland.
All right.